delighted representation of Indonesian history, combining the structure of a ship and featuring traditional architectures. This pavilion is a symbol of optimism and growth. Witness a magical journey through an eye-opening parade of our visions wrapped in arts. Harmonize with the serenity of nature to behold Indonesia's mega biodiversity. Let's dive deep into Indonesia's vast wonders. Learn the fascinating culture that creates genuine transformation through ethnic roots and diverse traditions to reach the future. Explore an immersive experience to see what you could contribute to Indonesia in the future. Empowering the nation through a thriving green economy, where innovation and sustainability drive growth. Protect natural resources
Cek,
and
1, 2.
create a prosperous, eco-conscious nation.
1, 2.
By harnessing the potential of our oceans, we are fostering sustainable growth, secure livelihoods, and preserve vital marine ecosystems.
Check.
Unlocking Indonesia's
Check.
vast culinary and agricultural potentials to nourish a growing
Is it too low?
nation.
No, I think it should be okay.
Providing you opportunities to make the most of Indonesia's abundant natural resources that hold immense
Cek,
potential
1.
for prosperity and sustainability.
Cek.
Seek captivating ideas from the business forums held throughout the expo. Come over
Cek.
to enjoy the Indonesian way of life through cultural
Cek.
performances, arts, and culinary delights. Experience the essence of sustainability through the materials and designs presented in our pavilion. Each element reflects our commitment to the future. See what the nation has to offer to preserve its nature, culture, and future. Join the expedition of Indonesia's growth and participate in the journey for a better tomorrow. We want you to come aboard the Indonesian Pavilion. From the
Cek.
13th of April to the 13th of October at Expo 2025 Osaka, Kansai.
As the world economy continues to evolve, those who strive are those with strong resolve. Indonesia is where such resolve abounds. The right place for your business to get off the ground. A bright spot in an otherwise uncertain time. With the strategic downstream industry on the climb. Indonesia, your better tomorrow.
Ladies and gents, we are running 5 minutes late, so feel free to grab your coffee, tea, or water before we start. Apologies for the slight delay.
Saya juga bingung ya. Yang ada fotonya, gue mau you have a business card, it's not 3 months. Yeah. This QR code here will have all the events and talks that we have for you. Also check, please let the residents see the town. How are you?
Good. How are you? If someone wants to join, they haven't to be registered yet. Which one is this 5%?
Like now there's a big bowl, but it's like not big enough. Hope you're Mr. Chief Market Relations Officer.
Sorry, is my working? Do we have a panel? I can hang it up with you.
But anyway, please take your seats.
Check, check. Mulai? Apa boleh? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For the first Kadin Indonesia session, it is a privilege to welcome many of friends of Indonesia to the Indonesia Pavilion at Davos, to a flagship session, Indonesia as the rising economic powerhouse in the middle of Indo-Pacific, achieving 8% growth target amidst the geopolitical tensions. We are honored to be joined by Chairman of Indonesia Chamber of Commerce and Industry, call it Kadin Indonesia, who is just inaugurated less than a week ago, but by President of the Republic Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto. So we're with us here, Mr. Anindya Bakri joining us. Let's give a round of applause. We also will be inviting Pak Anin to say a few words for keynote before we invite our panel.
Thank you, Stephen. First of all, welcome to the Indonesia House. So you have to go 1,500 meters all the way up to the mountain to talk about your country. But this is to our lovely guests, and thank you for visiting our house. So we came yesterday, and it was on the day of the inauguration of President Trump. So we were looking and we were discussing, actually just across the street, what are the few words defining that moment for Indonesia and probably the world. So the first one, I think, acceptance. I think we have to accept that this is it, right? This is the second term of President Trump. We have seen 2016, 2020, but this is 2.0. Let's see how it is. I think he's less angry, I would say. He's talking about bold moves, but coming from Indonesia, those bold moves are okay, I think, right? About the energy transition that he's talking about, and also a lot of other things. The second word that was, I think, coming to our mind is a sense of emergency. When I was talking to our European colleagues in the room last night as well, and also actually when we spoke to some Chinese friends, they say this sense of emergency is probably good because things are not as usual. And the third thing I was, taking notes was about, balancing between adaptation and conviction. So when it comes to Indonesia, I think we have our own adaptation, our own conviction. The conviction is that we believe what we have done in the last 10 years, I think should be continued, but we need to do a couple of new things. But one, as we spoke this morning, we certainly have scale as an economy. We have about $1.3 trillion economy. And when we say we want to grow 4x in the next 20 years, we have grown 5x in the last 20 years, right? So this is not easy by any means, but it is not unachievable because by that time we'll get to the $20,000 per capita status, right? And the 285 million people is a lot of people, especially when you look at 2/3 of the population is young, below 40 years old. And when you look at Indonesia as the, I can say, the big brother, the big sister of ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries, which has 800, 900 million people, that's another advantage of focusing in Indonesia. And other than scale, I think we also have, I would say, momentum. We spoke a little bit about the last 10 years. I think this is the 91st day of President Prabowo in the office. He is bold economically with a lot of, I would say, welfare programs such as free meal, such as free health checkups, as well as the affordable housing. But all of that needs money, right? So the money, other than the company, the country is growing, I think, is coming from investments and opening up markets. And this is why we're here in Davos, making sure that we can convince a lot of the potential investors to invest in Indonesia before it's too late, because we like to say, I think within 1.5 years, we should be from triple B to triple B plus, which put us into an investment grade status. But also, the second thing, to make sure that we open up the market beyond what we already have done with China, the US, ASEAN, and so forth. So I really am thankful for all of you to have such a big interest in Indonesia. Indonesia needs all of you. And a little bit about Chambers of Commerce and Industry. It is a semi-statutory body because every company in Indonesia, large or small, cooperatives, including state-owned enterprises, by law, it has to be a member of CADIN. So our job, our KPI, is as simple as ease of doing business. We got to make sure that it is easy to do business in Indonesia. The government will continue with their plan. The government will continue to streamline the rules and regulations. But ultimately, I think the business sectors like us are the one who risk our capital and hopefully, do well because we have to be responsible with our own, stakeholders or shareholders. So once again, thank you very much for all of you to come in. So looking forward for having a nice discussion.
Thank you, Pak Anin. Please take a seat. I'll also call upon our moderator who will be inviting the rest of our panel speakers today. So Sunita, Asia-Pacific Managing Director of Bloomberg, that you will moderate you. Sunita, let's give her an applause.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for making the time to be here this afternoon. It's a pleasure and a delight. I am so excited here to have Mr. Bakri here, but also I'd like to invite my panel up on stage, Felipe Oliveira, who is the Senior Advisor for Climate Investment at DPG, but also, as we saw earlier, Chief Market Relations Officer at Rubicon Carbon. Philippe, lovely to meet you, and ex-Bloomberg as well, so lovely to meet an ex-colleague. Matthew Chamberlain, CEO for London Metal Exchange. Wonderful to have you here, and thank you for making the time. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm hoping we can talk about, in a lot more detail, a focus on the energy transition and the huge opportunity for Indonesia. Indonesia, no doubt, the moment is now. It has been for the last few years. We've seen that with the G20 in 2022, with the chairmanship of ASEAN, and really just some very ambitious but more importantly, achievable goals set by President Prabowo of 8% growth. This is a perfect opportunity, as Mr. Bakri was just explaining to us, for all the reasons that we've just seen in some of the data that has been shared. So if I may, Mr. Bakri, just start with you. Help us understand the role of energy transition in this ambitious goal, but also realizing that.
Test. Energy transition is very important as much as Indonesia want to be impactful in the global supply chain of energy transition. Because as we will have a good discussion, Indonesia has a chance to be one of the leaders in decarbonization, period. Because below the ground, we have the critical minerals that we have always talked about, the nickel, tin, bauxite, copper, right? Those are very much needed for energy transition. And above the ground, we have this renewable energy potential as much as 400 gigawatt, in which 100 gigawatt in the next 15 years, 75% coming from renewable energy, and that means 75 megawatt, which is the same with the total installed capacity today. So this is big, right? And then around us, we have the biodiversity. I think the number is 500 gigaton coming from peatland, mangroves, forests, and coral. So it is almost your one-stop shop for decarbonization, if you will. And plus, Indonesia needs this decarbonization because we want to also be sustainable and live a good life, but also because Indonesia imports oil. So there is this inherent tendency to really want to replace that from the subsidy of oil by doing electrification, energy transition, and whatnot. Now, all of them, I think, as I discussed earlier, need money, technology, talents, and many other things, right? But if you look at Indonesia, the GDP is very important. We spoke about wanting to grow from $4,000 to $20,000 in 20 years. But jobs are also very important. I mean, all over the place now, including in Europe, America, but it's very important for Indonesia because we have a lot of young people. We produce about 2.5 million babies every year. Our investment minister mentioned that in 2 years, you create another Singapore, for example. Right? So we need jobs actually as much as about 2 to 3 million a year. Right? And the beautiful thing about this energy transition is that it creates employment at the places we didn't think before. Right? Even geographically, a lot of the economic activities is happening in Java, the main island, almost 40 to 45%. But now with the downstreaming activities is happening in the eastern part of Indonesia more than others. Right? So energy transition is very important. We want to take place in the global ecosystem, but we need a lot of collaborators to be with us. And when we say it, we actually mean it because unlike some other countries that can make it on their own, but not many now, only maybe one or two. Even that is getting more difficult. We actually need collaborators with us. Lastly, what I want to mention is that Indonesia constitutionally is non-aligned. Having said that, I think it is an economic sense to do business with everybody. So for example, for electrification, while a lot of people look at China being nice and early coming into Indonesia with the technology, capital, and so forth, electrification, Indonesia is well advanced with America, with Ford and Vale, which is one of the good mine in Indonesia. And number two, with European, with the likes Eramet, Volkswagen. We're also doing on the supply of nickel. And of course with China, with BYD, or Hyundai and LG with Korea. So all in all, we are very much, and Indonesia has the fiscal space to grow, but for the amount of money that we need to grow, we need to reach, we certainly want to make sure we go to Davos, among others, and try to get as many believers as possible.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very clear message to not just investors, but also the kind of future prospect. Matt, if I can come to you for a moment, and coming back to the topic about nickel and copper, what are your perspectives on Indonesia's potential to reshape the global supply chain? That is very much the topic at the moment, global supply chain.
Absolutely. Well, and firstly, it's a pleasure to be here. And in this context, I think it's important to remember that Indonesia and the broader Southeast Asian region has been a responsible and key supply partner for global metals for many, many years. I mean, actually, I go back and I look at the formation of the LME back in 1877. Why did the LME get formed? It got formed because the UK was going through an industrial revolution. It was no longer self-sufficient in copper and in tin, and it had to, the world had to build global trade patterns. And actually, back in those days, most of the copper at that time came from Chile, and most of the tin came from the broader Southeast Asian region, particularly the Indonesian islands, right? And so it's important to recognize that this is a centuries-long relationship. But I think, exactly to your point, there has never been a more important time for it, and there's never been a better time for Indonesia to be really leveraging its capabilities, its knowledge, the skills of its people, not just the mineral resources, but the end-to-end value chain that can be created. And maybe just to take nickel as an example, I mean, let's be clear, Indonesia is an important player in many of the metals on the LME, with listed brands, obviously for tin, the most historically established, but copper, the fantastic mines in West Papua, and aluminium smelting, lead recycling, but nickel is clearly one of the areas with the biggest focus right now, and that's understandable because of our needs for nickel as we decarbonize. And I think there is this incredible opportunity because at the same time as we're looking to electrification technologies to deal with the climate crisis, and we need more of the critical minerals, nickel is the example we're using, but also there's a greater societal expectation that the minerals that are going to support that transition are themselves produced in environments that respect human rights, that are working towards decarbonization, as we've heard. And this all goes back to the point about Indonesia being such a vital partner for any country that wants to be part of that. I think there's been a lot of conversations this week. It's been kind of one of the real themes of Davos, around critical minerals, mineral supply, how that relates to geopolitics. And I think, in summary, there's no better time for Indonesia to be really driving its role as critical to this industry.
I was going to come back and ask you that question with, we are living in a world where we're fully aware of the geopolitical tensions. And in that context, what would be some of the advice that you would share in terms of ensuring both stability and competitiveness for Indonesia's metal exports?
Well, I think Indonesia starts by being in a position where it's globally respected for stability in particular. So it's seen as a very stable partner that won't use its control of minerals to achieve its own geopolitical aims, that it's a trusted partner. I think that's very, very important. But taking nickel as an example, because it's a fascinating case study, because of the great growth of the Indonesian nickel industry, we're now in a position, I think we saw it on the slides earlier, where Indonesia now accounts for more than 50% of global nickel. That may raise to 60-65% over coming years. And when you get that big in the market, there naturally are going to be questions about concentration risk, about supply chain risk. And we have seen that with other countries that have been through that transition. So I think, and I'm not telling my Indonesian colleagues anything they don't already know, because there's been a huge amount of work done on this. But I really admire the work that is being done in two respects to I think, really solidify this. So rather than simply going for maximum ore extraction, and actually Indonesia isn't the biggest exporter of nickel ores, because Indonesia has invested in at least the first and second stage processing of taking those laterite ores and converting them into a matte or an MHP, which is an intermediate form that can be exported. So focusing on capturing more of the value chain, because that's great, because it means you're focusing on not building a massive dominance that can create concerns, but also it creates those value-add jobs, brings in those new technologies, builds the economy, not just in Java, as we heard, but in Sulawesi, etc. And then the second dimension, which is what we're talking about here, is investing in decarbonization, because then you can actually produce a premium product. And again, if you look at what Indonesia has done, the economy or the industry has really evolved. So even 10 years ago, the mining, you would strip out the top ores and you'd go down to the bottom ores and they get refined through a more polluting process, rotary kiln electric furnace. Actually, there's been this incredible investment in going back to that topsoil that was discarded, refining that through acid leaching, and creating nickel, which is a materially lower carbon footprint. And by investing there, and one of the things we need to work on is helping people get a green premium for that, right? People need to be rewarded for doing the right thing. But I think those two dimensions of building a deeper value chain and building a greener value chain is exactly the right thing to do, rather than simply targeting market share, which makes people nervous and doesn't give you the value-add jobs that a country needs.
Thank you, Matt. I may come back to you and ask you a question on domestic processing. You talked a little bit about that, but I'm conscious that Philippe has been very patient. So thank you for that. Philippe, in your role as a senior advisor and with your expertise for climate investments, how do you view Indonesia's downstream policies and renewable energy initiatives? Because we heard from Mr. Bakri, there is an opportunity, but there's also a need for climate-focused investments. Love to hear your point of view on that.
So I'm going to have a balanced conversation. This is great. Indonesia is leading in many fronts. This is a great opportunity. We are in a geopolitical problem. Global North is leading again on putting us away from where we should be in our climate policies. So knowing that my own government yesterday now has removed itself from the Paris Agreement, which is not great. It has removed 4 years of good progress. This is an opportunity not only for Indonesia, but for the Global South to say, basta. And how do we do that? That's by unification. This is what ASEAN's doing very well. This is what the African Union's pushing along with the United Nations, and hopefully COP30 pushes that as an agenda of saying, this is the strategy you can follow, or you can just watch. And how do we do that? Well, we have companies, many companies. If we look at SBTI, there are 5,000 companies with net zero goals, committed net zero goals. They're marketing tools. Out of the 5,000, we have 1,000 that are actually listening and doing something about it. But they're not very active in the carbon space. Out of the 100, only 20 are really pushing the ball. Those are your usual suspects, Microsoft, Netflix, Salesforce, and so on. So how do we push and make the other folks more involved? Well, that's where, countries like Indonesia advise, this is what we do here. By demonstrating, for example, an NDC RFP, just similar to what Singapore is doing. So we have a market that's $2 billion, that's the VCM. We have a compliance market that's $840 billion. The lipstick market is $7 billion. Lipstick. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Coming from, right? So how do we, if the lipstick market has a stronger touch of scaling to actual 100 billion, and this is what they project if you go on ChatGPT, okay? How do we're all here in Davos, we know climate's important. So how does Indonesia actually lead that front of scaling the VCM and leading in policy that is so important and has been discussed in the last 4 years? And we go to the same conferences. I go to the G20, I do opening remarks. I go to the G7, I go to COP. We always have the same conversations, similar to this one. So how do we change the narrative? Impact now, change now, and this is what we're doing. So it's not about the time is right now. It's been right for the past couple of years. So how do we change that narrative? So I'll leave it there. Go ahead.
Thank you. I read somewhere that in times of chaos and depression, red lipstick soars in sales, and there must be something to that. But we won't talk about that right now. This is not about talking about cosmetics. Mr. Bakri, I want to come to you. I'd love you were deep in thought. I'd love to hear your perspective just on some of the comments by our fellow panelists. And the opportunity, once again, coming back to investment and coming back to, as the chair of Kadin, what would be the kind of top 3 things for you, if you like, in 2025 that will solidify the message, the narrative, capture the opportunity of this is how we do it in Indonesia, but also be laser focused on where and how Indonesia will enable, will facilitate and will support the investment into the industries that are most important for this growth of 8%?
I think the downstreaming of critical minerals is still high up there because the critical minerals is there with us. The technology is out there from our partners, and people want to invest in it mostly because they also want to be the off-taker of the value-added products, right? So downstreaming of critical minerals is good. And not only we talk about nickel, nickel is interesting because we started with stainless steel. We export it when they haven't, meaning the government have not mandated to process the nickel. We exported $3 billion. Now we exported $33 billion within the course of 3 years. So that's a lot for Indonesia or for a lot of countries as well. And number two, I think the downstreaming should not stop really at the critical minerals. I think the downstreaming should also come in the food security sector, because Indonesia want to be also self-reliant in the food security. And I think, it is not impossible that Indonesia will have a lot of food estates to ensure that the free meal program of the government, this is free meal to 80 million people, 80. That means you need 80 million eggs every day. You need 8 million chickens to be, to be fed, and you need a lot of vegetables and meat as well, right? So I think this is also something that Indonesia want to do, and then this is also under Minister of Investment and Downstreaming. So when we talk about downstreaming, it's not only critical minerals, but I think it is also as important the investment and growth in the health and education sector, right? Because now Indonesia is pretty much digitalized, right? Now, once you are digitalized, is what you do with it. And I think education and health are those sectors that Indonesia should really put a lot of attention to bring a lot of investors, a lot of technology partners in it. But coming back, I guess, in this panel that focuses on not only 8%, but the energy transition, I think Indonesia is coming from the angle that, hey, the glass is probably half full. So we take this as an opportunity rather than, just pure challenge. Yes, we have challenge. We want to live better life, better air. But I think, maybe in the next 50 years, if Indonesia want to get to the, high income status, every country has its strategy. I think Indonesia's strategy is to do downstreaming successfully and be in the supply chain, the global supply chain that will impact and benefit the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Bakri. Matt, if I can bring you back to the point about domestic processing. Indonesia has very ambitious plans to increase its domestic processing of its mined metals. How do you, from your standpoint, how can Indonesia balance its export policies and domestic industry growth, really to optimize its impact on the global market?
Yeah, of course. And I think, again, a lot of this goes to having a diversified strategy. So if I maybe, I'll use copper as an example because there's been a lot of good studies on this. So pretty much every country that has favorable copper reserves has at some point tried to build out that downstream processing industry, and for good reason, right? There's very compelling job creation reasons, there's compelling environmental reasons because you're not shipping the concentrates halfway across the world, there's national security reasons, there's trade relations reasons. But actually, if you look at where the copper market is right now, because there is overcapacity in certain countries in terms of refining, it's very difficult to make good money out of refining. Actually, last year, the so-called treatment charges, what a refiner charges to turn the concentrated ore into the refined metal, were negative, i.e. the refining market was so oversupplied that the refiners were paying the miners for the privilege of refining their metal. And there's some there's some reasons why that still works, because you can take offtake from the waste products, you get some gold out, etc. But overall, the business of copper smelting right now is not one that you would naturally invest in from a purely financial perspective, given those economics. As I say, there are perhaps other good reasons for doing it. But I think that demonstrates that it would be very difficult to economically advocate a policy of everything being processed in country. Actually, you probably want, and Indonesia obviously does have the smelter PT Timah, which is a LME registered brand, and we really appreciate them working with us. But I think actually Indonesia, in its copper industry, which is built up over many years, has this quite balanced approach of exporting, but also looking at building capacity internally where appropriate, based on the market economics and kind of other political factors. So I think it's that balanced approach. It's everything, keeping everything in balance, not being dogmatic about doing everything in country, because that can be as exposed and as risky as giving away all your value through exports. So that would be my approach. And actually, I think the Indonesia Mining Ministry has a very advanced analyst in this market, and I imagine this is what they're looking at every day.
Thank you, Matt. Philippe, can we come back to talking about transition metals and Indonesia, really, in terms of leveraging that opportunity with the carbon markets?
Well, the carbon markets is a great opportunity for the Global North to invest in projects in the Global South. I think we now do have mechanisms that assure quality. Indonesia has quality. So at Rubicon, which is a TPG Rise incubation, we finance projects. So if there are developers here that have projects in Indonesia that need financing, we do invest. We develop our own, so we would invest in Indonesia. We're looking and doing that as we speak. But going back to corporations, there is a huge interest in actually investing in Southeast Asia, especially with the new administration that Indonesia has demonstrated leadership, specifically on climate ambition. So there is quality. There is mechanisms to assure quality for the Global North to invest in the Global South. And carbon credits is a great way to bring that liquidity to the Global South. I personally have seen that change in Africa. Part of another role that I have, I'm a senior advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, along with Sustainable Energy for All. I have seen what the carbon credit market has done in Nigeria, specifically in a small village 45 kilometers outside of Lagos. That transition of solar panels has brought families that didn't have, clean water. That clean water brought health. That health then brought the ability of bringing nature-based solutions to the area, brought money to actually build a hospital. That building a hospital now has ways of bringing safe ways of having birth for women. Clean cooking is a problem, and that is also another way of carbon credits being involved in supplying, whether it's gas stoves or other utilities. These are all the mechanisms of where you can get paid and rewarded for a clean transition. So yes, going back, carbon markets is a solution, obviously, and Indonesia is definitely pushing that through a lot of what ASEAN's doing, and Steve is making a lot of the clients aware. And now we just need to continue branding that, and assuring clients that we do have the mechanisms of bringing quality credits, and we at Rubicon have them, and I can assure that many of others are doing that too. So
thank you. It's wonderful to bring it back to the people. Yeah. That's very endearing, but also fantastic example of how it's done in Africa, which I think we all know, but sometimes we tend to overlook that over profit. I want to just have some final kind of rapid fire, if I may, and finish it off with Mr. Bakri sharing his perspective. If we were sitting here next year, which we will, I'm sure, What would you want to see from where we started this conversation? What does different look like?
So for me, from a purely geeky metals perspective, I do look at the carbon intensity of the Indonesian nickel output. And what I would really hope, and I think I'm confident will happen, is that there is as much nickel coming out of Indonesia next year, but that the average carbon intensity of that material has fallen as the new projects come on stream. And if I'm being really ambitious, I would hope that Indonesian producers are being paid a fair premium, be that through carbon credits or market mechanisms, whatever it is, for doing the right thing.
Thank you. Philip?
Well, hopefully Indonesia will have its NDCR for RFP and follow Singapore. I think Singapore has done a great job, and the collaboration between the two countries has been great. So hopefully that would be my, not ambitious, but I expect that to happen. And then secondly, that we don't just focus on what's happening in the global north, but the global south by now. We'll have a strategy to announce at COP30 of where we're going with this planet. So hopefully that's ambitious, but also reality. So,
thank you. Mr. Bakri, final words.
No, I think a lot of the good stuff is being said. Number one, how can Indonesia be known, not only being able to produce nickel, copper, and whatnot, but how you produce it is also important. If we can be seen as the standard for safe, secure, sustainable critical minerals, and it can be done. I think that's a good aim for Indonesia in the next 20 years as we're trying to get to the golden era of centennial Indonesia. And the second thing, I agree with you. I think carbon market, if we are able to get the carbon capture monetized, I think that's going to be a beautiful way to fundraise, to again fuel the downstreaming process, which will bring welfare to the rest of Indonesia. And lastly, it is a hopeful thinking that maybe during Trump era we can have some sort of FTA, limited FTA, because maybe with the style of President Trump that focus on in a bilateral as opposed to multilateral can be good for Indonesia, especially no matter how big the US is trying to build its own technology, EV and so on, they still need the critical minerals. So maybe this is the time, right, for us to do that. So it's just wishful thinking, but why not?
Possible, definite possibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, Matt, Philip, Mr. Bakri. Thank you for being such a patient audience.
Thank you, Sunil. We do have a token appreciation for our panel speakers. So let's just two more minutes, if that's okay, Sunita. So Pak Anin will be giving token appreciation to a few of those. It's actually coming from a beautiful craftsmanship from Papua, actually. So do you mind all stand, Pak Anin? If you stand, Pak Anin can give one to ladies first, and we'll take a picture. Special fabric.
Absolutely, nice and warm. That is so kind. Thank you so much.
So it looks like that.
Firstly, it's my favorite color.
Maybe one quick picture.
Also very touching.
So when you see this, not only you remember Indonesia, but you remember the most eastern part of Indonesia, and this is where you have the biggest high potentials going forward. So this is beautiful.
Let's give a round of applause to the session hosted by Indonesia Chamber of Commerce and Industry in collaboration with Ministry of Investment and Downstream Industry. Thank you.